The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show, the home of geek, folklore, paranormal entertainment, with me, Charles Christian, as once again we delve into the worlds of weirdness, urban myths, history, geek culture, ghosts, magic, witchcraft, the occult, and anything else I think will intrigue you. We've another interview coming up, but first, now the notional publication date for this show is Thursday, 24th of June. And I know we're also into the time of the summer solstice, longest day, Litha, midsummer's day time of the year. All festivals we've discussed before on this show. But I hadn't realised June the 24th is also International Fairy Day. It's a day for fairy believers, young and old, to celebrate the stories, magic and history of the fairy folk, or fairies, or fae, whatever you like to call them. And it's also believed that at this time of the year, especially the night of the 23rd, when Midsummer's Eve slips over into Midsummer's Day, that the divisions between our world, the world of people, and the other world of the fairy folk is at its thinnest, so you may see the fae. And even if you don't, use International Fairy Day as an opportunity to reconnect with your childhood fantasies. Come on, surely everyone believed in fairies at one point in their lives, even if it was only the tooth fairy. So, if you can, take a walk in the woods somewhere. Sit out in a garden in the evening. In parts of rural England at the moment, you can catch sight of glowworms, although you may also know them as fireflies or even lightning bugs. In bygone days, the presence of fireflies were believed to drive away evil, while in Japan the different species of fireflies are said to be the ghosts of rival clans of warriors. And if you can't get out and about, well, at least read a classic fairy tale or watch a fairy-themed music. There are shed loads of movies to choose from on the streaming platforms at the moment. As for the stories, even the great M.R. James allowed himself some midsummer magic in his story After Dark in the Playing Fields, although his story inevitably touches upon the darker side of fairy folk. Right, on with the show. Time for another of our creature features. These are based on the column I do for Ancient Origins magazine, and this time we're looking at the werewolf, the archetype skinwalker. Now I confess I do have a soft spot for werewolves, possibly because it's the only cryptid or paranormal creature I've ever gone hunting for. And it was on the night of a full moon in the summer of 2016 at the behest of an English newspaper. Spoiler alert, I didn't find one. Or at least it didn't find me that night. Not surprisingly, I did my homework before I set off that night, and while much of the material I uncovered is probably already well known to listeners of this show, there were a few surprises, not least the fact that so much of what we in the West now regard as traditional werewolf lore, including the bit about shooting a werewolf with a silver bullet, and if you do, the creature will revert back to its original human form. It actually all stems from a couple of movies made in the 1930s, namely The Werewolf of London and The Wolfman. If you go further back in time to the days of the mass witchcraft trials of the late 16th and 17th centuries, which include a number of werewolf incidents, you'll find the supposed werewolves were killed by hanging, beheading, being burned at the stake, shooting, or just run through with spears, pikes, staffs, and other pointy objects. The other aspect of werewolves I've always found intriguing is that there is an almost universal belief in their existence, including the skinwalking aspect of being able to turn from a human being into a wolf and back again, and in cultures from all around the world, including Native Americans, who shared this belief long before Europeans came onto the scene. But where did these beliefs come from? There may be some form of race memory of the now extinct direwolf, which had a frightening set of jaws and which coincided with early man until around the end of the last ice age. There is also the fact the grey wolf we encounter today was certainly a dangerous nuisance in Europe throughout the Middle Ages and into the early modern period and beyond in some locations. Then there were the Vikings, another dangerous nuisance in Europe from the 8th century until the end of the 11th century. In particular, there was a practice of Viking berserker warriors dressing in the skins of bears and wolves. Those wearing wolfskins were known as the Ulfnir before going into battle. Now, imagine yourself in the place of a 10th century peasant fleeing a Viking raid, cowering for shelter as an army of blood-splattered half-naked Vikings dressed in the skins of bears and wolves march past. Are they really human beings, or are they half wolf and half men? Werewolves, in fact. Finally, there is what is now termed clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric syndrome involving a delusion that the affected person can transform into an animal. This includes the belief people can physically shapeshift into wolves and, in some unfortunate cases, act like wolves attacking people. There is no agreed mechanism for the condition, but it may be a psychotic episode caused by other conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or clinical depression. And it's not just wolves. A whole variety of animal transformations have been reported, including gerbils, although I suspect The Curse of the Weird Gerbil would never be turned into a Hollywood movie. Now, we mentioned earlier on that we're at I suppose you'd say, magical time of the year with midsummer and the summer solstice. So I thought I would dig into the always excellent paranormal database, www.paranormaldatabase.com, to see what other events were happening in the UK, ghostly sightings, occurrences of that nature. And there's plenty. At Bellona Bridge, which is on the Isle of Man, and it's generally said to happen on the 20th of June. On this day, the fairy population comes out in force. If they are not acknowledged by anyone crossing the bridge, the fairy folk will have no hesitation in making their presence felt. This is a belief that sprites and pixies and the like, that you really should be polite to them, say, hello, gentlefolk, or something of that nature. Even doff your hat if you're wearing them, otherwise they can get very tetchy. What else have we got? Well, the 20th of June, Cadbury Castle, which is down in Somerset. This is one of the occasions where King Arthur apparently makes a reappearance, and he's said to be seen on the road escorted by mounted knights carrying lances, and they travel back to Camelot because Cadbury is thought to be the location of Camelot. And there is a report of one man in 1995 who said he encountered an armoured man holding a standard on a horseback, and the figure disappeared around a corner, though there was no place that he could have gone. And the legend also says that a door opens every 7 years in the hillside there, so Arthur and his company can leave to feed their horses, which is nice. What else have we got? Arthur's Table, again. This is in Cornwall, Bossany Mound, and it's said that at midnight on the 20th of June, King Arthur's table briefly appears from beneath the mound, waiting once more for the king and his knights to sit there. That's rather sad but sweet. Over in County Wicklow in Ireland, at Bray, there is a Lover's Leap Rock in the Dargle Valley. And it's said on the 23rd of June, although some accounts say it's Midsummer Eve, a female ghost appears here once a year, who is said to be that of a woman who was unfaithful to her boyfriend. He died of grief, and the woman sat mourning over his grave for several days before leaping from the rock into the river and taking her own life. Now, down in Tavistock in Devon on the 23rd of June, or again it may be Midsummer's Eve, we have one of those processions outside of churches, and it's said that the spirits of those who will die in the parish during the following year come to the church on Midsummer's Eve. Those who are going to die and have their funerals in the church or be buried in the churchyard. And rather conveniently, apparently the last time they were seen was by a pair of brothers who saw themselves in the crowd, and consequently they died, and there's nobody left to question them on the veracity of their tale. And Oxfordshire now for Enstone. And again, this is the 23rd of June or Midsummer's Eve. The variation is because obviously the summer solstice does move over a 3-day period over the years. And there are 3 standing stones here, and they're said to be of a man, his dog and his horse. The horse, the largest stone, is said to wander down to the village stream on Midsummer Eve to take a drink of water. The stones are also said to return to their positions if anyone tries to move them. Gwent now, Trellick, in the area around the wells there, and again, Midsummer Eve or 23rd of June. Fairies are said to make their presence known around this area once a year, trooping about. And as ever, if you encounter them, be polite to them or they will get snotty with you. Staying in Wales, Llangattock, which is in Powys, and apologies if I've pronounced it wrong, but Llangattock Park. On the eve of Midsummer, the devil would emerge and spend time dancing with local fairies around a clump of trees, which may seem a bit odd, but there is a tradition in fairy lore that the fairies are actually in the thrall of the devil or Old Nick. And in Thomas Rhymer, there's a tale that every 7 years they must pay a tithe of human souls to the devil so that he doesn't destroy the fairy folk. What else? Oh, still in Llangattock, there is a stone known as the Lonely Shepherd, also known as the Peaky Stone. And the stone is said to have once been an abusive farmer who drove his wife to commit suicide in a nearby river. A witch who witnessed the abuse turned the farmer into a stone, permitting him to move just 1 day a year, which is Midsummer's Eve, when he wanders around the area calling out his wife's name. Yeah, it serves you right with no tolerance for wife beaters. What else we got here? Worthing, Sussex, Broadwater Green. There's an old oak tree there, and again, Midsummer's Eve, it's said there's a local tale that animated bones appear on Midsummer Night's Eve to dance and jig around the tree until the sun rises the following morning. So a little hint there, if you are wandering around at midnight on Midsummer's Eve, watch out for dancing fairies, watch out for dancing skeletons, watch out for dancing stones, watch out for devils. And we've got another one here, Bettiscombe in Dorset, the Sliding Hill. And again, 23rd or the Midsummer's Eve, the hill is said to be named after a magical stone that grants wishes. Once a year on Midsummer Eve, the stone, this is the wishing stone, slides down the hill and then returns the following day. And just a couple more. West Kennet, Wiltshire, the Long Barrow. And there's reports of encounters, again, Midsummer's Eve, of a white dog. There are reports in 1995 and 1996. Appears to coincide with the start of the longest day of the year. The pale hound has been observed at sunrise. Some say the dog is accompanied by a ghostly druid. And finally, just down the road from our studios, Blythburgh, Suffolk, on the B1125, Blythburgh to Westleton Road, crossroads known locally as the Five Finger Post. And this is a more precise date, the 24th of June, and it is a ghost of a woman called Anne Blakemore, dressed in blue. And it said she was murdered in 1750 on this date, and the ghost walks on the 24th and has apparently developed a habit of running in front of cars, convincing drivers that they've run over a living person. And I say, you have to watch out for her on the 24th of June. Might actually go down there with the video and see if we can we'll film the crossroads. And that's it. A few little diary dates for you. Now time for this week's interview. Our guest is Seth Breedlove, an Ohio-based filmmaker. He has written, edited and produced and directed shorts and features about a variety of topics, but is best known for his production company and the films they've produced under the Small Town Monsters banner. Before getting into film, Breedlove wrote for a number of websites, newspapers and magazines, and learned some of the skills he employs as a director while working as a reporter. Breedlove has also appeared on numerous television and radio programmes. In 2018, Seth helped launch an episodic series under the Small Town Monsters umbrella called On the Trail of. He produced the first season along with his wife and went on to direct, shoot and edit the second season, which focused on Bigfoot. And he has now moved on to the topic of UFOs. I suppose one of the first questions, now you make films about cryptids, cryptozoology, UFOs, things of that nature. What got you interested in it in the first place? I mean, was it a case of you got a gig making a film about it and then thought, oh, I can make a niche of it, or did you have a long-standing interest before you started making films?
No, I didn't have a long-standing interest. I got into it in my mid-20s, and I'm almost 40 now. So it was something that came a little later in life. I think I'm just interested in the unexplained. I'm very interested in stories and storytelling, how legends evolve, how stories evolve over time to become something that they weren't when they began. And I wrote for newspapers when we started making Small Town Monsters movies, and I brought some of those techniques that I learned in newspaper reporting into the documentary game. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a combination of a few different things. Mostly it came down to boredom. I was very bored at the time. I worked a really boring job, and it gave me a lot of time to think and to ponder what my approach to the paranormal would be, and that's how we came to land on what is Small Town Monsters. Small Town Monsters actually began life as a book proposal that was rejected by most publishers, and I ended up taking one of the cases that we covered in that book proposal and turning it into our first movie, which was Minerva Monster. And then once we had made that movie, I kind of took the book proposal, reworked it, and turned it into a series of films.
Was it the Minerva Monster was the first one?
Yeah, Minerva was first. Beast of Whitehall was second. Beast of Whitehall is the one that On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey kind of revisits. But Minerva was our first. But the thing about Minerva that is different from what we do now is with Minerva, I basically partnered with these two guys who handled all the camera work and editing. And I didn't love the fact that I had very little control over the final movie. And so with Beast of Whitehall, I kind of changed things up and started, focusing on shooting it myself and editing.
Right. And did you have filmmaking skills before, or did you learn on the job, which obviously with modern software and Macs is now something that is viable, whereas 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it would have been out of the question.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely I was always interested in filmmaking. I had a love for filmmaking. My director of photography, who works on all my movies, Zach Palmisano, him and I became friends because we both wanted to go to film school and be filmmakers. But I'd kind of given up on that. So when we made Minerva as a film, it didn't strike me that we were actually making a movie until long after it was out. So there were definitely techniques and skills that I was aware of when it came to filmmaking, but most of what we were doing was learning on the job, as it were. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I bring to our movies, and especially in the early days, is just a knowledge of how to tell stories, which is obviously the most important part of this.
Yeah, precisely. And sadly, it's a thing that's often missing in many, certainly YouTube videos, etc. You lose the will to live halfway through.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I got you. You've filmed Bigfoot-related ones. You've also filmed, you're now starting or have started on UFOs. Of the, I suppose you'd call them cryptids, what was the most interesting one you've encountered? I mean, you've got, the Boggy Creek Monster, Mothman, the Flatwood Monster, the Bray Road Monster, which is very famous.
Mm-hmm. My personal favorite as a story is the story of the Mothman in Point Pleasant, because unlike a lot of these cryptid stories, there's a very clear beginning, middle, end. That story follows a 3-act structure when you're boiling it down to just the 1966-67 wave of sightings that happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So that, that's probably my favorite, just because unlike a lot of these stories, that one is easy to tell in a narrative fashion, in a way that makes sense, and it doesn't just feel like a series of unconnected events. Mm-hmm. Everything in the Point Pleasant case sort of built up to something, and that something was the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which took place in 1967 and resulted in the loss of 46 lives. So, you don't have that opportunity to have a story have that kind of flow to it when it comes to reality, but that story does. And so, that's probably my favorite, just in terms of storytelling. It's such an interesting one to I guess, condense down into a documentary format. I love revisiting these Bigfoot topics because it takes me out into parts of the country that I don't get to go to otherwise. But in terms of just the story itself, it's the Mothman.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Bigfoot must be difficult because there's supposed sightings from all over the country, all over North America. It really doesn't seem to have progressed much beyond the famous or infamous clip of Bigfoot walking across a clearing in a wood, however many years ago, 30 years, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, that kind of makes Bigfoot fun to cover, because I do feel like there's a lot of interesting stories out there that haven't been covered and haven't been told. So that's why we keep revisiting Bigfoot. But Bigfoot, you had to kind of approach it from a regional standpoint rather than being able to look at a broader topic, because the mythology related to Bigfoot, it's older, but it doesn't have the same kind of ancient maybe mythology that something like the Bray Red Beast does, where you can dive back into like the Beast of Jevedon stories and some of the mythology that's built up around werewolves. Bigfoot, honestly, despite the fact that there are sightings in nearly every country and nearly every continent on the globe, Bigfoot to me is very much an American story when I look at it. But I think there's so many unique aspects to Bigfoot that it's the one that I'll probably continually revisit, even if God forbid, like Small Town Monsters were to close down or something like that. I think I would still be revisiting the Bigfoot subject because it's so unique and interesting, and you have so many witnesses, so many interesting dynamics within the community itself. There's sort of an endless amount of Bigfoot drama to cover amongst the different disparate camps, revolving around theories as to what these things are and how they should be treated, and whether or not we should bring in a body and all those kinds of things. I mean, my first series about this topic, On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Legend, and On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Search, those two episodes really got into the minutia of how the community functions, how different researchers view one another, and the drama that can build up just around that. So that's completely discounting all the amazing and fascinating witness stories. You've got all this interpersonal drama that takes place within the community itself. So to me, there's like an endless wellspring of stories to be told about the Bigfoot topic.
Yes, I must admit, I see some reports and people saying, what we got to do is catch a Bigfoot and shoot it and bring it in. And you think, well, if it really exists and is some rare hangover from, species, the last thing you want is to push it further towards extinction.
Yeah, I think that in itself is a very interesting side note to the whole Bigfoot subject. There's been so many very volatile arguments that have erupted within that community around whether or not a Bigfoot should be shot and why you would do such a thing and what the end game would be if you did that thing. I've focused on people within the Bigfoot world who have gone out into areas where they claim to see Bigfoot, and their sole reason for being there is to bring in a body. The thinking tends to be that if we can present a body to science, then you can definitively prove they exist, and that would, help with some sort of conservation effort to protect the habitat of what these things might be if they exist. And so there's any number of really fascinating stories about Bigfoot.
Yeah. Now, some of your films are made under the Small Town Monsters label, and some are on the Trail of. Are they merely just sort of subsets of the same thing, or is it a slightly different approach?
Yeah, they're all made under Small Town Monsters. That's actually the name of the production company. But definitely the main Small Town Monsters series are basically are films like The Mothman at Point Pleasant and The Flatwoods Monster or The Boggy Creek Monster. And those films tend to be simply retellings of cases from around the country. We go to a place, we interview witnesses, we talk to some locals, we learn about how those cases impacted the local culture. And then those films tend to be very cinematic and focus heavily on recreations and just kind of like integrating a really unique film style into a documentary format. Whereas On the Trail tends to be more raw, a little more. We spend a lot more time out in the wilds or the woods, depending on what the topic is, with people. We go to sighting locations with people, and On the Trail of, the crew itself tends to be on camera quite a bit, whereas in the main series we're never seen or acknowledged in any way. So it's basically just a way for us. On the Trail of sort of began life as a way for us to do our own variation on the the old Leonard Nimoy In Search Of series. And yes. I think it's evolved into something else entirely now, where we can do movies like On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey, that are very personal, that tell a personal kind of story. And, while still doing that, telling that story, within the context of the greater Bigfoot topic. And I think, like On the Trail of, in a way, has become my preferred way of telling stories. I didn't think it would be, because I'm a film freak. I love film, and On the Trail of tends to be less stylistic and more just about capturing the world around us. But I really love that raw nature of the series. I mean, in On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey, my director of photography was a 17-year-old kid. So, half the movie was shot on the fly with little time for setups and things like that. And I kind of enjoy that run and gun nature of that series and the titles we make under that umbrella.
Mm-hmm. What sort of equipment are you using then for, when you're out on location? Because, I mean, professional video filmmaking gear can start very small and get very large. Presumably you're going for a fairly compact approach, are you? Because you've got to lug it around.
Definitely.
And
Yeah, for sure. With On the Trail of Bigfoot, because we're staying out in the woods a lot of the time. And even if we're not staying in the woods, then in that case, we're usually traveling halfway across the country by plane, and you've got to make sure you can condense your kit. So these days we're shooting entirely on Sony, mostly mirrorless. So that we have two A7S3s, we have an FX3, and then we have an A7 III and multiple Sony handy cams with the night vision for nighttime photography. We've got drones. It's a condensed kit. When we're making one of the films, things can change. We can rent like an FS7 or an FX6 or something like that, a little bigger camera. And that's just to make sure we're really pushing the boundaries of what we can achieve with the cinematic look on those films. But yeah, it all comes down to the project at the same time. Like there's On the Trail of Bigfoot, but we also do a series called On the Trail of UFOs, and On the Trail of UFOs tends to be a little more polished than the Bigfoot series. It tends to be something we're trying to marry the cinematic look of the standard series with, the more run and gun nature of On the Trail of, and On the Trail of UFOs also integrates a lot of CG recreations and things like that. So, to me, end of the day, I don't know that there is a better looking series out there or better looking content that comes out about these particular topics. I think we've been doing it for so long and doing so much with it and really honing our craft that, in my opinion, we're kind of at the top of the game. And that's because the crew is very talented at what it is that we do. So if you watch a movie like On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey in that film, the star of the show is the scenery, right? So like the nature that surrounds us and the Adirondack Mountains. But for something like The Mark of the Bell Witch, the cinematography is really a standout on the more standard documentary series. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done over the last 5-6 years to start where we were, where half our shots were blown out and the sound was terrible, to where we are today. I've been told by like Mike Doherty and Adam Wingard, those guys enjoy our movies. So I know that there's people in Hollywood who recognize what we're doing as well.
Yeah. I mean, The Mark of the Bell Witch must be a difficult one, because things like Bigfoot are ongoing, as indeed many of the other cryptids, whereas Bell Witch we're talking early 19th century, aren't we? And everything's gone, everyone's dead, everything's changed.
Yeah, that was a tricky one. That's the first project we worked on where we didn't have living witnesses to sort of talk about their own sightings and things like that. So we were really forced to kind of come up with a unique and creative way to tell to do recreations and to bring the story to life. And at the end of the day, that's probably one of my favorite movies we've made, just because it really taxed us in terms of how we approached the creative end of that. And I think, like, just traditionally with STM, our best movies tend to be the ones that that really push the boundaries of what we can achieve on the budgets that we're working on. Mark of the Bell Witch was shot for, probably around $18,000, and I think it's a really, really, a beautiful movie at times, and just what we're able to achieve on the budgets we were working on is surprising to a lot of people.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Turning to UFOs, that's a bit of a sort of jump from cryptids, isn't it? And you're into a whole different area of people with strange ideas about their UFO encounters. What turned you onto that one? Because that's sort of a bit of a rabbit hole to go down.
Well, I think it just opens up the type of stories that we're able to tell. UFOs were present in the Mothman movie that we made all the way back in 2017. So they've been a part of our films for a while. To really delve into the UFO subject as a whole, that really did open up what we were able to focus on and the types of stories to really get into like some of the conspiracy aspects of ufology, and you've got the whole abduction angle. So there's just so much you can do with that particular topic, and I think that was really attractive to us when we started making it, and just in general, we had been asked for a long time if we were going to do something that really got into UFOs as a subject. So that's what kind of brought us around to do On the Trail of UFOs.
One thing you don't appear to be filming are ghost stories, hauntings. Is that because the market's already saturated with the various TV series, or?
Actually, we do a series. On the Trail of Hauntings is our YouTube member exclusive. So it comes out exclusively on our YouTube channel for people that are members of our YouTube channel. And I agree, like the market's incredibly saturated for ghost hunting. And so I gave that series over to Santino Vitale, who does all of our effects work. And Santino had some interesting ideas for how to approach that. Basically what we do is make a show where the STM crew goes out and looks for ghosts, and then nothing happens, but there's a lot of laughs along the way. So that's kind of like our approach is basically to make maybe the only honest ghost hunting show out there.
Yeah.
And most of the time we don't find anything. None of us have been haunted yet, despite looking for ghosts during the making of these. But yeah, it's really, I think the way Santino put it when we talked about it the first time was it's like comedians and cars getting coffee meets like ghost adventures. And it's a very, kind of silly, fun show, and it has a very unique approach to ghosts and ghost hunting, ghost stories.
Oh, brilliant. If somebody wanted to get a good introduction to the films you're making, where would be a good place to start?
Like if you're looking for a specific title, I always just suggest starting with the Mothman of Point Pleasant. I think it's the one that more people kind of come to or find us through. Beyond that, On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Legend is probably the biggest thing we've made in terms of audience. Either of those two will introduce you to the larger Small Town Monsters stable of titles really well, I think. Most of our titles, if not all of them, are available on Amazon, or iTunes has a lot of our titles, Google Play, Vudu, Tubi TV. I mean, at this point, you can kind of find Small Town Monsters just by searching for them, and you'll dig up pretty much everything we've done fairly easily. But yeah, I would start with On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Legend, or the Mothman of Point Pleasant, and then there's On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Search, and now On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Journey, and then there is a sequel to the Mothman of Point Pleasant called The Mothman Legacy that kind of picks up where that one leaves off as well. So that's a good starting place.
Yeah. Now, I've got some notes here. I'm not quite sure how up to date they are, but it's saying you've got an upcoming film, but it may well already be out, called The Howl of Rougarou.
Yeah, that's the one. I'm actually sitting here editing that one today. So we're in the process of putting that one together, and that'll be out later this year. I I think mid-September, that one will drop from 1091. So 1091, pick that one up, and it'll have, another one of these full-scale sort of distribution release campaigns. And it's a unique take on the real werewolf sort of mythology, especially when it relates to the Deep South. I mean, it's an area that isn't like anything else we've ever filmed before. We went into the Atchafalaya Basin to film parts of it, which is like one of the deepest swamps you can find in America. And, we filmed all around there. And then the movie itself, the recreations have a really strong found footage inspiration that we're pulling from to make those recreations. So it's continuing to sort of push the style of what we do with our films, and doing it, I think, in a way that the audience is going to find really exciting, especially coming out, just before Halloween.
Yeah. No, that's always a good time. Always a good time. And what about future projects?
Yeah, this is our biggest year by a landslide. So we've got On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey just dropped today.
Right.
July, we've got, August is our next, that'll be On the Trail of UFOs, Dark Sky. That's out in mid-July or mid-August. And then September is Howl of the Rougarou. November is On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Discovery. And then in December, we're putting out a movie called On the Trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman. So at the end of this year, we'll have put out 6 movies, into wide release. I mean, technically, The Mark of the Bell Witch came out in December of last year, but it was picked up after the fact by 1091 and then kind of released on a larger scale. So technically we'll put out 6 movies this year. We also have a YouTube channel that we're building content for as well. So there's a series over there called Beyond the Trail that comes out kind of sporadically throughout the year. And then we do a video series where some of the STM crew analyzes purported paranormal evidence called Paranormal Unexplained. And then we also do a lot of like behind the scenes type of content for channel members. So we're pretty much constantly working on something, sometimes multiple things at any given time.
How big a team have you got then?
I would say core group is probably 6 or 7 people.
Yeah.
But the STM team as a whole is probably much larger than that, 12, 15 people that are consistently working on the movies in some fashion or TV or YouTube content or something. So it's always been this way. I just feel like in the last year, especially, I think the sort of core group has grown much larger than it was before, but there's always been a lot of people. I mean, any film production company is going to have a lot of people involved, and ours is no
Yes,
different. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are if it weren't for the people that work on these things.
Yeah. And presumably a lot of what you were doing was held up last year with lockdown and everything.
Actually, like just the sort of film production end of things. And even then, we made movies like On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey, which in that one we kind of focused on COVID and lockdowns to make it a part of the story. But it wasn't as crazy as you would expect. We were able to continue focusing on what we were doing, and as long as the projects were within a couple hours of home, we were able to continue working on it. So we just changed up the production slate a little bit. There was only one project that got delayed all of last year, and that's the Lake Michigan Mothman movie that's coming out later this year.
You personally, you've talked about Mothman. Which of these things you've investigated or made films about has personally been the most interesting for you?
It's Bigfoot. I mean, I'll always come. Yeah, I'll always come back to Bigfoot. I think it appeals to the things that I really enjoy. Whether it's story or nature related. I like spending time outside. I like going for hikes and spending time in the woods and seeing new places and traveling. And there's just something about Bigfoot that appeals to that part of me. And I don't get sick of it. When you're making these kind of stories for a living, you can definitely get burned out on some of these topics if you focus on the same sort of topic too many times. And so far, Bigfoot's the thing that I keep going back to. So it's definitely Bigfoot.
Yeah. Now, I've got a note here about a case you covered. One was the Kinderhook creature.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? That's one that's completely off my radar.
Yeah, that's actually part of On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Journey. So there's a town named Kinderhook in upstate New York. It's actually sort of the Hudson Valley area of New York. And it's actually, in a way, that town is where the legend of Sleepy Hollow was born, because Irving was actually staying in that town when he dreamed up the concept for the legend of Sleepy Hollow. So it's a town with a weird history of things, strange things happening. You know, they have a lot of ghost stories, and there was a rash of sightings in the 1950s of what they called the Kinderhook blob, which was this white winged creature that was seen by a lot of people. But in the 70s and into the 80s, and I guess still up to present day, there's sightings of what they call the Kinderhook creature, which is I guess you would call it a Bigfoot type creature. It hasn't been seen, maybe in as clear a way as a typical Bigfoot. A lot of the times people are simply looking at red eyes in the night, or they're encountering something screaming at them in the dark. But we interviewed members of a family that live on the edge of a swamp and a fairly large stretch of wilderness who encountered the creature behind their house, over a course of like 20 years. And they actually managed to capture some really interesting audio of what they think was the Kinderhook creature, like screaming. So that's all part of On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Journey. On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Journey is, in terms of like story, it's very interesting because it dives back and forth between, really sort of small scale personal storytelling and then into these much larger elements of the Bigfoot phenomenon as a whole. And that includes some of these regional monster stories like the Beast of Whitehall and the Kinderhook creature. Right.
The Beast of Whitehall, that was another Bigfoot then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, and we actually focused on that story back in 2016. We made a movie called The Beast of Whitehall.
Right. Where's Whitehall, as a matter of interest?
That is right at the base of the Adirondack Mountains. So it's in upstate New York. It's I would probably call it the Bigfoot capital of the East Coast here in America. It's definitely a place where people go to sort of experience Bigfoot culture. They have a Bigfoot calling contest every year and a huge festival that entirely centers around Bigfoot. So it's kind of like on the West Coast here, we have Willow Creek, which is where the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot. And this is sort of comparable to that, but on the East Coast.
Did you win an award for that, Beast of Whitehall?
Yeah, we won some film festival awards. That was actually one of the, I don't think we submitted too much after that one. In the early days of Small Town Monsters, we were kind of figuring out how to do all this stuff. And I know with that movie, we submitted it to a lot of film festivals. And, I think what kind of turned me off to film festivals is that they can't get past the topic of our movies, the subject of our movies. And so they kind of ignore the filmmaking or the craft side of it and simply look at it, maybe put their nose in the air toward it because it's about Bigfoot instead of, death row inmates or something.
Yeah.
We kind of have quit even submitting to film festivals since then. But Whitehall did get a little bit of love, especially regionally here in Ohio.
Yeah, yeah. Does Ohio have its own particular monster at all?
Yeah, the Minerva monster, which is, the focus of our first movie, that's an Ohio monster legend. And that town, the town of Minerva, was, maybe 20, 25 minutes from where I grew up as a kid. So I grew up very aware of Minerva monster, the Minerva monster case. And, the kids in my neighborhood at night used to say, don't go out after dark or the Minerva monster will get you. So it was one of those local legends you kind of grew up aware of. And I think it's probably in Ohio, it's probably one of the most famous. I mean, technically, the thing about that is Ohio bears a little bit of the blame for the Mothman as well, or I guess adopts some ownership of the Mothman, because a lot of the initial 60s sightings of the Mothman took place in Gallipolis, Ohio, which is just across the river from Point Pleasant. But obviously, because of the Mothman Museum being situated in Point Pleasant, most consider Mothman a West Virginia icon. But
Yeah.
I think Ohio gets to claim some ownership of it as well.
That's wonderful. And are you purely based filming in the United States, or do you have plans to go further afield when travel opens up?
We would absolutely love to travel out of the country, for future projects. I think our problem always is going to be that we're a completely independent production house, right? So we fund everything ourselves, either out of our own pocket or out of the Kickstarter campaign that we run at the beginning of each year. So we are, we're pretty much relegated to making the movies we can afford to make, and unfortunately that excludes getting too international with it. But I'd love to at some point find the money to get out of the country. I think that'd be great.
Well, that was fascinating, Seth. Thank you ever so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Once again, a big thank you to this week's guest, Seth Breedlove. Love his line about producing the only honest ghost hunting show, which of course is real life, because in 99.9% of ghost hunts you actually encounter nothing. You can find out more about his work by checking out his website at www.smalltownmonsters.com and www.onthetrailof.tv. If you check out the Weird Tales website at urbanfantasist.com or our Weird Tales Show YouTube channel, you'll also find links to a couple of short trailers for his work on the trail of Bigfoot and on the trail of UFOs.
Good day, gentlefolk. I doth have breaking news. Your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, has written a new book called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. 5 shocking true tales that are stranger than fiction. There's murder, mayhem, treason, incest, adultery, and worse. Read about the real antics of 9 saints. Yes, saints. 8 kings and 5 queens of England, plus the wickedest of all stepmothers. And be amazed, or horrified, or appalled, or all 3. If you love weird history, and methinks you do, hop over to Amazon for your copy of Charles Christian's Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. Grab yours now.
Here's a diary date for you. Saturday, 24th of July, I'm being interviewed by Ancient Origins on the topic of one of my books, Dark Age Saints and Sinners. Lots of skullduggery among the Saxons, the people who put sex into Wessex. If you are a member of the Ancient Origins organisation, you'll know where to find them. If you don't, full details at www.ancient-origins.net. And I say that's Saturday, 24th of July. The other night I was tracking down some old 60s era music clips on YouTube when I stumbled across Zoot Mooney, whose original outfit was the Big Roll Band and who later went on to play with Eric Burdon and the Animals. However, between those two bands, for a couple of years, 1967 to 68, he ran a band called Dantalion's Chariot. The lineup incidentally included Andy Summers, who later went on to greater success with the Police. But back to Dantalion's Chariot. They were very much riding the psychedelic wave and had one of the best light shows this side of the Atlantic. I actually saw them in my hometown of Scarborough around this time. But as I was looking at them on YouTube, the thought crossed my mind, who or what was Dantalion? It turns out the answer can be found in the Ars Goetia, which is part of an anonymous 17th century grimoire on demonology called the Lemegeton, or the Lesser Key of Solomon. According to the grimoire, Dantalion is a powerful great duke of hell with 36 legions of demons under his command. He is the 71st of the 72 spirits of Solomon, whatever that means. He teaches all arts and sciences and also declares the secret counsel of anyone, given that he knows the thoughts of all people and can change them at his will. He can also cause love and show the similitude of any person, show the same by means of a vision, and let them be in any part of the world they will. He is depicted as a man with many appearances, which I think means he is a shape changer who can appear with the face of a man or a woman. And he's usually also depicted holding a book in his hands. Quite what this has to do with a swinging 60s psychedelic flavoured band, I'm not quite sure. But there again, the band Dantalion's Chariots' most successful single was The Madman Running Through the Fields. And that's it. But before we go, we mentioned at the start of the show that the 24th of June is International Fairy Day. But it's also National Handshake Day in the United States. Although thanks to COVID, that's probably now on hold or else been renamed National Elbow Bump Day. It is also National Pralines Day. Chocolate. It is St. John's Day, or Festa Junina if you're in Brazil. And this year, at least in India, the 24th is the celebration of Sant Guru Kabir Jayanati, a 15th century Indian mystic, poet and holy man whose work is honoured by both the Hindu and Sikh communities. Although some of his verses are still all too pertinent in today's crazy social media times. Here's a little line. I see the world is mad. I tell the truth, they rush to beat me. If I tell a lie, they trust me. Sounds like a few politicians. Now, it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying thank you so much for listening in. Please join me again next week for more weird tales in weird times. Until then, stay well, stay weird. Goodbye.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, folklore, and the paranormal. You can keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Goodbye.